Welcome to the Korea Pro Podcast, your weekly guide to understanding the most pressing and complicated developments shaping South Korea. We're your hosts, Jeongmin Kim,
John Lei,
and Joon Ha Park of Korea Pro.
Go beyond headlines as we explain not just what happened, but also what really matters and why it matters.
If you monitor South Korea for work or just trying to keep up, you're in the right place.
This is the Korea Pro Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Korea Pro Podcast. It is now Wednesday, August 27th, and we're recording a bit earlier than usual this week.
And it's still Tuesday in DC, which is just the day after whatever happened between South Korea and the U.S. That was kind of important, right? So we were monitoring the U.S.-South Korea summit with curtain raisers and pre-writes and whatnot, but something unexpected happened. So before you went to bed, night before the summit result was supposed to come out, what did you see, John?
Well, it's quite nice for you to assume that I was actually going to bed that night anyway. But about 2 hours before the Trump-Lee summit happened, there was this big thing on social media, and Joon Ha, you're the one who actually clued me into this. Donald Trump wrote a post on Truth Social, something about how South Korea seems to be experiencing, quote-unquote, a revolution or a purge, and that and that we, quote-unquote, we, being Americans, could not do business in South Korea under those kinds of circumstances.
Well, I was about to go to bed because I was supposed to be on morning shift to cover all that. But then, unfortunately, I did see the Truth Social, so I could not really go to bed after that.
I wanted to throw my shoe at the wall.
Yeah, me too. So this was interesting because throughout the preparation period, the entire, the National Security Advisor Lee Sung-nak have been doing multiple briefings about what was about to happen at the summit. And there were a lot of schedule, all planned out. And Lee even did like a in-flight press meeting about what he thinks about strategic flexibility of the USFK, Alcon transfer not being part of the summit, blah, 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 blah. So we thought it was all going to be about security and trade, right? But this post was really out of nowhere, so it blasted urgent and breaking news in South Korea.
Right.
And the presidential office staffers was doing briefing at the right moment, at that exact moment. So when reporters asked them, presidential office was all like, we'll need to check if it's fake news or not. But then it turns out it wasn't fake news. And then Trump actually doubled down on it afterward because he was signing an executive order in the morning, EST. And reporters asked him, like, what was that post about? And he was saying, I heard there were raids, very vicious raids on churches in South Korea under the new South Korean government. We can't have that. We will not stand that. And he also mentioned this U.S. military base being searched. And Trump said that probably shouldn't have happened. And also he added, I don't know if that's true. So he wasn't citing any sources. But later on, when he met Lee at the Oval Office, he said it was per his intel. Let's put a pin on that. But this happened in the morning, right before Lee walked into the White House. So they were all caught off guard. But once Lee actually met Trump, the optics were just all quite friendly. So how did they interact with each other? What did they talk about, John and Joon Ha?
Right. So when Lee arrived at the Oval Office, they did all the formality, all the summitry, and basically Trump spoke first, saying that he was welcoming Lee. It was an honor to be with the South Korean president, and then he congratulated him on his election victory as well.
And he was like, I'm 100% with you.
Yeah. And
the conservatives here would have cried over that probably.
Yes, not just the conservatives, but also the far right. And I think that what we saw Lee say really did strike a good note with Trump. So Lee was talking about, or he was basically praising Trump in front of his face, saying that, it was because of him that North Korea, South Korea relations were much better throughout the Moon Jae-in era. However, with his hiatus from government.
That was interesting wording choice. He said, your brief hiatus from politics.
Yes, and those 4 years did not contain much.
And it actually got worse, he said.
It actually got worse with North Korea becoming this sort of nuclear-armed sort of state in that format. And
he didn't mention it as
He didn't mention it as state, but he was sort of referring to it as that. But, of course, Trump was very much on the boasting format.
And he was flattered and he seemed happy.
He seemed happy. He said that the Pyeongchang Olympics in 2018 was all successful because of his doing.
Which is chronologically wrong, but okay.
Yeah, and then we just saw a bunch of questions from both South Korean press journalists and also the foreign press, the White House press in the room.
Which was not a separate press conference, but it was during the Oval Office meeting, which was just open to press, right?
Yeah. And then we saw a South Korean journalist from, I believe it was Arirang, who asked the question, what do you think makes the alliance great? And I think
such a sharp question.
I think the question was a bit of a missed opportunity. There was a lot of questions that were ringing, especially from this Truth Social post as well. But we did see a question from a South Korean journalist about the Truth Social post and what Trump meant. And as you mentioned, Trump did say that it was based on his own intel. And then Lee stepped in and then informed him that it was about a special prosecutor, which Trump stepped in and said...
Do you mean deranged Jack Smith?
Yeah. So he was referring to his own sort of political worries. But of course, I think Lee handled the situation quite well. He was very, very cordial in explaining to the president and his team that the raid in itself did not happen to a U.S. base.
Right, but let's move back to optics a little bit because we covered a lot of the content-related stuff in our analyses. There were like moments like, Trump pulling the chair for Lee like he does for a lot of different foreign leaders. And in South Korea, that actually got viral online because, online commentators were saying, oh, that's actually Trump's way of testing leaders, if they take it or not. But Lee actually just stayed standing up, signing it. Which was taken well by the South Korean public. And he brought some sort of custom-made pen because, Trump likes marker pens or something. And Trump actually wanted that, so Lee gave it to him. So overall, there were like a lot of, either choreographed or sort of unplanned, like good optics going on.
Yeah.
But when a reporter pushed Trump to answer the question of reduction of the U.S. forces Korea troops, Trump said, I'm not going to answer that because we're friends. But then he went on to explain a lot of things that he said before, like, NATO pays more now, allies should be paying more for their defenses. We have been paying so much for the, troops based in South Korea. And then he mentioned something like he wants the U.S. Forces Korea base to be not on lease, but actually he wants the ownership. John, is that something technically possible?
It's never been done before. The United States has hundreds of bases around the world, and none of that land in all of those host countries has been given to the United States. They're all on lease.
Right. But also a national security advisor said that it's actually not lease with rents, but it was a grant, a donation.
It's a lease by any other name.
Right.
But essentially what it comes down to is that, yes, the United States military is on that land and using it for their own purposes. And as long as the alliance holds that land, will continue to be occupied and used by U.S. troops. But to actually sign an agreement handing over that piece of property to the United States government to make it U.S. territory, that's unprecedented.
Right. So there were a whole lot of things that did not get covered in the summit meeting, maybe intentionally, like, the defense cost sharing, SMA, US FK purview, or whether it will or not it will be expanded to China purview. That wasn't discussed as well. But to me, what stood out was Lee's choice to go to CSIS, aside from any other types of think tanks. It's pretty conservative. We know that people at the CSIS have been very critical of Lee in the past because of, his past remarks, like, say xie to China and Taiwan sort of remarks. He has this image of being a pro-China person. And it did look like, to me, that Lee was trying to dilute that a little bit by saying that, there will come a time that we cannot do security for the U.S. and trade us with China sort of stance. So he was saying that he knows that he will need to make a change at some point, but he still maintained very, very vague sort of talking points when it comes to security overall. Let's move to trade. After the summit itself, Lee moved to Philadelphia to visit the shipyard. There were some MOUs that were signed, but also there were some trade and tariff-related discussion during the Oval Office meeting, but not much new revelation that stood out to me. John, correct me if I'm wrong.
Even before the whole thing started, as soon as Donald Trump and Lee Jae-myung sat down for the summit, Trump started talking, and of course he preempted any sort of trade talks by saying, I understand that the South Korean government is not entirely happy with the tariffs and that they're here to renegotiate or to ask for more things, but they're not going to get it.
They're not going to get that,
yeah,
Trump.
And so Trump immediately just put out his veto card right there.
And so while smirking,
While smirking, of course. He knew, he knows very well that no one is happy with the tariffs, but that's not something that he's going to be willing to budge on. the MAGA base would eat him alive if he did. And so he vetoed it immediately from the get-go. So when we look at the actual meeting where the two leaders talked, it was all very surface level. It was all cordial. It was all, as you said in your analysis, Jeongmin, it was about building rapport.
Yeah.
There was no constructive things at all. And so when it comes to trade, it wasn't discussed in the Oval Office. It was discussed outside of it, and not by the leaders, but by businesses. We saw this huge delegation of Korean businesses that followed Lee Jae-myung to Washington.
Right, the roundtable.
The roundtable discussions, and that's when they were all hammering things out. Korean Air decided to buy, $50 billion worth of aircraft and engine parts from Boeing and GE, respectively. And we saw other billions of dollars worth of shipbuilding cooperation deals. Samsung and Hyundai were doing their own things as well. This is on top of the $350 billion that South Korea already agreed to invest in the U.S. According to the July 31st tariff deal. And so this is basically South Korean businesses as well ingratiating themselves within the U.S. supply chain with, of course, Seoul's blessing.
Right. Anything about the shipyard visit that was new at all?
No, it was not new. The shipbuilding cooperation thing has been discussed for months, even under the Yoon administration. That was something that they were all talking about. Now, we've already published this analysis about a little under 2 weeks before the summit took place. But but in that analysis that we published in Korea Pro, and if you haven't read it, please subscribe, we were already talking about how this kind of shipbuilding cooperation is going to face a lot of roadblocks, not because of the lack of will to cooperate between Seoul and Washington, but because of American domestic laws. For example, we've talked about this before off the podcast, but the United States has something called the Jones Act. And what this law does is that it really restricts foreign companies' ability to repair ships or to build ships, especially when those ships are being built or repaired for the United States military.
Right.
And so because of these kinds of domestic laws, they might not be, the shipbuilding cooperation that everyone's talking about might not be as expansive as many people hope, but that doesn't change the fact that this is, about politics and about optics for the time being. And so right now, no one at the top levels of either government is actually talking about these shortcomings. They're just talking about how the future looks all rosy at the moment.
I see. And it was interesting, like we mentioned last week, that Lee went to Tokyo first to meet Ishiba rather than go to Trump first. And the summit was Saturday, and then he flew out on Sunday, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Did they mention anything related to China?
Right. So there was sort of a divide between the rhetoric coming from Prime Minister Shigeru Shiba and President Lee Jae-myung during their joint press conference. So Prime Minister Shigeru Shiba was talking about how a breach on the status quo by force will not be accepted by the state of Japan. However, Lee did not say anything regarding China, which or some of the analysis that I got was that this was sort of a strategic divide between how South Korea and Japan interpret China as a strategic threat to the region. However, I think Lee Jae-myung's objective going into the Japan summit was not to sort of be on the nitty-gritty details of everything and sort of iron out everything. But I think he was just going there for stability.
Right, and something to say if Trump asks anything about Japan, right, which he did. Trump actually brought up Japan issue in a very Trumpian manner. Trump was like comfort women issue. Like Koreans are always about comfort women issue. Trump said and that Koreans were obsessing about it. It was really difficult because of that to make them be friends again. And he actually touted his own achievement during that time on trilateral. And then Lee was like, when Trump said that he still has concerns about that, Lee was like, well, I went to Tokyo to actually remove those hurdles with Ishiba. I think maybe that was a plan, it seems. But John, last week you mentioned that Lee is probably going to Tokyo to exchange notes first before going to the U.S. After having seen the U.S. summit, what kind of notes, if any, do you think they exchanged?
Well, clearly, after that meeting with Ishiba, I think Lee Jae-myung already knew what he had to do even before the meeting. I think it was all just really about formalities. But if I were a doctor, I would have told Lee Jae-myung that after that meeting, he should really make sure that there are no fecal matter left on his nose because of all the brown nosing that he did. The guy was just going full-on flattery mode.
I was really hoping you wouldn't say that out loud, but okay, I expected that.
Yeah.
So that was the exchange note part, like how to treat Trump, what kind of person Trump is.
It
basically.
was relentless brown nosing.
Right. And also it was interesting though, because this is Korea Pro podcast and we don't like handle North Korea issues all that much, but we do have to mention almost everything that Lee focused on during Oval Office meeting was North Korea. And I think it was intentional.
Of course it was.
Because Trump loves talking about his first-term achievements that he brought with Kim Jong-un.
Pure flattery.
Yeah, and then Lee was even like trying to sound humble at one point, saying, oh, like, North Korea hates me so much, and you're the only man that can bring progress when it comes to this matter. I will only assist you, he said.
Because, whenever you think of Lee Jae-myung, the immediate word that you think of immediately is humility.
Well, but it's all in the same pattern, like him trying to rebrand himself in DC when it comes to China. And when it comes to North Korea-related reputation, he also had this connotation of a relatively pro-engagement and sort of pro-North Korea, allegedly, person because of his North Korea remittance case.
Well, he did hint at it. He was saying, you be the peacemaker, I'll be the pacemaker.
I wonder if he actually knew what a pacemaker is.
What does it actually mean?
To Trump especially. But anyway, before we keep on moving on to the next thing, I think we do need to backtrack and talk about the social media post, about the raids on the churches and the chaos that Trump was referring to.
Right, I think we can end on that note as well, because to me, that was the biggest revelation, actually, aside from, the lack of strategic flexibility wording. Like we expected, it's a first meeting. But it actually revealed one of the biggest risks that Lee have to handle going forward when having Trump as a U.S. counterpart, the partisan narrative creating feedback loop. We saw this happening real time, very quickly escalating. The claims that Trump was citing, the raids against churches and the purges, revolution, these all sound very similar to the warnings that we kept seeing in online communities, far-right communities in South Korea, or YouTubers or pundits or whatnot, and which also goes into English language narrative on Twitter, on Facebook, whatnot, in the MAGA crowd, very anti-China crowd in the US. So we cannot really fully confidently say which church it was or which base it was, although the base, later the prosecutors explained it's Osan Air Base. Church, we just don't know where it came from. Like there are multiple possibilities of, which church raids, he was talking about. But I think a broader implication of this is impulsive messaging on social media, and whoever is feeding that sort of narrative into Trump's ears, it could actually derail diplomacy very, very quickly, even when it has been planned for 2 months, right? And although we cannot exactly know where the source of this information was, it sounds really similar to what we have been seeing online, like Gordon Chang comments, Morris Tan comments, and the webinar that they hosted, a press conference that they hosted in the DC about backsliding in South Korea, election rigging in South Korea, Lee being communist and pro-China, all that stuff. It's sort of coming together into one bulk of narrative that you can see hints in the Trump Truth Social post. So for Lee, the risk here and what he has to manage is not just nitty-gritty details of the alliance security part of it, but also what kind of narrative that Trump hears about that shapes his impression of what South Korea is. And so he will need to monitor very, very closely what kind of YouTube comments are out there and what kind of online social media posts are out there, which will be a very difficult job.
It's going to be a life-sucking job to
Right.
monitor all of that. But it has to be done. We've already seen just the craziest and the most random sorts of posts on social media, whether it was coming from the Korean far right or the American far right. But regardless of who is making these kinds of claims or statements, we already saw what happens when a president falls into the right-wing social media rabbit hole.
Right.
We had to impeach one president because of that.
Right. We saw what happened when such narratives shape someone's worldview.
And if that worldview happens to seep into the minds of the sitting president of the United States, that could have far more significant repercussions than just, the South Korean president,
Right,
or at
and
least the former South Korean president.
And the far more significant implications include, difficulties that it could cause when it comes to South Korea choosing a China policy, USFK policy, because of domestic public opinion about what Lee is doing. Because South Korean people are very impressionable when Trump says something, when a U.S. leader says something about South Korea. So it got really close when Trump posted that online, that the far right or even just conservative, like People Power Party ad hoc leader, they were saying that, oh, look, Trump is immediately suspicious of Lee, like we expected during the presidential campaign. So it all also spilled over into South Korean domestic politics and stability here as well. So this space we will need to watch very, very closely.
And that brings us to the end of our discussion today. This was only a one-topic podcast, but there was way too much to discuss, and we couldn't even discuss all of it. So this is a good time to wrap it up.
Looking to stay informed about South Korea's fast-evolving political, business and cultural landscape? Join us on Korea Pro, the go-to resource for in-depth analysis expertly curated by top-tier professionals. And now you can pick the membership level that best suits your needs, thanks to our new subscription packages. Starting at just $199 annually, you can access daily analysis and our weekly podcast. Or try our premium membership package, which offers additional perks such as executive briefings, monthly reports and forecasts, networking receptions and event opportunities, as well as much, much more. To find the best fit for you, just head to signup.koreapro.org and become a member today.
Week ahead, obviously we have to keep monitoring what comes out of the U.S. summit related issues because there has not been a joint statement nor a fact sheet. Like I heard there might be a fact sheet, but it's not even out. So we have to keep an eye on that. And also Lee is returning Thursday, and after that a lot of South Korean officials, including the policy coordinator at the Blue House, will be doing a lot of briefings. But it's also the start of a new month, so there will be some economic numbers coming out.
There's going to be a lot of economic numbers coming out. For example, in the first week of September, we're going to have the new consumer price index coming out. And there's also going to be the current account prints that's also be coming out. There's also the manufacturing purchasing managers index that will be coming out as well. And this is all coming out within the first week, by the way. And also, the 2026 budget bill is going to be due on September 2nd. And so that all of these things are some stuff that we're going to have to keep an eye on.
And Joon, any domestic political schedules? PPP has a new leader now.
Yeah, so the PPP does have a new leader. His name is Chang Dong-hyuk. He's quite pro-Yoon, as he stated throughout his numerous speeches that he's given at conventions. And also we will see confirmation hearing schedules from the gender minister nominees and the education minister nominee.
And all of this information will be sent to your email inboxes by Monday at 2 p.m. So if you'd like to know more, please subscribe. Have a good weekend, everyone.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We'll brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why it matters, delivered to your inbox every morning.
If you want to stay ahead of the curve, sign up for Korea Pro to get a full package of insights, from daily expert analysis to profiles, month in review, week ahead, and more.
And until next time, I'm Jeongmin Kim.
I'm Joon Ha Park.
And I'm John Lee, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.